years ago this month that the first film you directed, Boyz in the Hood, came out. You were 22 years old when you made that, 24 when you were nominated.
In 1991, a 23-year-old film student did something Hollywood said was impossible. He took a college assignment, turned it into a screenplay, and created one of the most powerful films in American cinema. But the story behind Boyz in the Hood is filled with secrets that sound like fiction. A father played by an actor barely older than his son, real gang members threatening to shoot the cast. A paralyzed actor whose wheelchair wasn't a prop. It was his reality. Production so dangerous, they needed bulletproof shields between takes. And a director so young that major studios laughed when he demanded creative control. These aren't rumors. These are documented facts that completely change how you see this masterpiece. Some of these secrets were deliberately hidden. Others were simply overlooked. But all of them reveal a production that was as intense, raw, and dangerous as the story it was telling. How many of these facts do you actually know? Let's find out. Fact 1. The father was only 7 years older than the son. When you watch Lawrence Fishburne deliver one of cinema's most iconic father performances as Furious Styles, you're seeing a man who embodies decades of wisdom, experience, and hard-earned street knowledge. He's the anchor of the film, the voice of reason teaching his teenage son how to survive South Central Los Angeles. But here's the truth that will blow your mind. Lawrence Fishburne was only 7 years older than Cuba Gooding Jr. when they filmed Boyz in the Hood. Let that sink in for a moment. 7 years. That's the age gap between some college roommates. Fishburne was 29 years old during production. Cuba Gooding Jr. was 22. In the real world, they could have been playing brothers, cousins, or friends who graduated high school at different times.
All of my friends was dropping out of high school, hanging out on corners, in front of liquor stores, getting drunk, getting high.
Instead, one played the seasoned father figure, and the other, his teenage son. Think about what Furious Styles represents in the film. He's supposed to be a man who became a father young, yes, but who spent years, decades even, learning the streets, making mistakes, surviving, and accumulating the wisdom he passes to Trey. He talks about property ownership, systemic racism, gentrification, and personal responsibility with the authority of someone who's lived through multiple generations of struggle. How does a 29-year-old actor convince you he's that person?
Man, my daddy told me a black man has got no business, no place in the white man's army.
The answer is pure talent, and John Singleton's genius casting instincts. Singleton wasn't looking at birth certificates or calculating realistic age gaps. He was looking for the actor who could embody the spirit of Furious Styles, the intelligence, the gravitas, the controlled strength, the wisdom worn like armor. And Fishburne delivered. His performance became so convincing that even today, most people assume there was a normal 15 to 20-year age gap between the actors. Nobody questions it. Nobody sees through it. The acting is that good. This reveals something important about filmmaking that audiences rarely consider. The magic isn't about matching reality perfectly. It's about creating a truth that feels more real than actual reality. Fishburne's Furious Styles feels like every wise father figure you've ever known, regardless of what the math says. But this wasn't the only questionable age gap in the film. In fact, another family had an even stranger situation that somehow worked perfectly on screen. Fact 2. The mother was basically the same age as her sons. If the Furious Trey age gap surprised you, wait until you hear about the Baker family. Tyra Ferrell played Mrs. Baker, the exhausted single mother raising two completely different sons in one of Los Angeles' most dangerous neighborhoods. She's the mother who shows devastating favoritism, building all her hopes on Ricky while essentially giving up on Doughboy. Her performance carries the weight of years of struggle, disappointment, and survival. Here's the reality. Tyra Ferrell was only 7 years older than Ice Cube and Morris Chestnut, the actors playing her sons. Ice Cube was 21 during filming. Morris Chestnut was 22. Tyra Ferrell was 28. That means she was playing the mother of two men who were essentially her peers in real life. If they'd met at a party, they could have been in the same social circle. Instead, she's disciplining them, favoring one over the other and delivering lines about how they've disappointed her for years. The character of Mrs. Baker is supposed to be a woman who had children very young and has been weathered by the constant stress of raising them in South Central. She's tired. She's seen too much. She's made peace with her limitations as a parent. She's given up on one son and placed all her dreams on the other. How do you play that when you're barely old enough to have teenage children in the first place? Farrell pulled it off through sheer acting ability and commitment to the character. She understood Mrs. Baker's emotional exhaustion, her favoritism, her regret. In the scenes where she tells Doughboy he's just like his father and will never amount to anything, you believe she said those words 1,000 times over many years. You believe she's a mother who's been fighting this battle since her sons were children. The scene where she shows clear preference for Ricky over Doughboy is heartbreaking because Farrell makes you understand this isn't a recent development. It's a pattern that's been destroying this family for years. And she was only 28 years old, making you believe all of that. This casting choice actually makes a subtle point about the community the film portrays. In neighborhoods where people become parents very young, where violence cuts lives short, where generational poverty compresses life experiences, age gaps between parents and children can indeed be smaller than in other communities. So while the casting seems unusual on paper, it accidentally reinforces something true about the environment. What these first two facts reveal is that John Singleton cared far more about finding actors who could embody the soul of these characters than matching traditional age expectations.
How does Singleton know that Ice Cube could be good in a movie?
He was making art, not a documentary, and that artistic vision led to one of the most authentic-feeling family dynamics ever put on screen, despite the math not adding up. But Singleton's commitment to authenticity went much further than just casting. Sometimes it meant bringing real trauma directly into the film. Fact 3. The actor in the wheelchair was actually paralyzed. In Boyz in the Hood, there's a character named Chris who sits in a wheelchair. He's one of Doughboy's friends, a constant reminder of what gun violence does to young people in the neighborhood. He's paralyzed from the waist down after being shot. When you watch those scenes, you're watching something that most films fake with able-bodied actors. But Ray Green, the actor playing Chris, wasn't acting when it came to his disability. He was actually paralyzed in real life. This is where the line between performance and reality disappeared completely. Ray Green was shot when he was 6 years old, not as an actor, not on a film set. In real life, in Richmond, California, he became a victim of gun violence when two neighbors got into a fight. One of them grabbed young Ray and used him as a human shield. The other started shooting. A bullet struck Ray's spine, paralyzing him from the waist down and changing his life forever. Just 2 hours after the shooting that left him unable to walk, Ray's father died from a drug overdose. So this 6-year-old child had to process two catastrophic losses simultaneously: his mobility and his father. Can you imagine carrying that weight? But Ray didn't let those traumas destroy him. By age 13, he was working as a professional actor, appearing in shows like Different Strokes, Highway to Heaven, and Aftermash. By the time John Singleton cast him in Boyz in the Hood, Green had both acting experience and the lived reality of exactly what his character represented. This wasn't method acting. This wasn't research. This was life.
You know, because you have this character who's gone through a very trying personal period in her life.
When Chris talks about the streets, about survival, about what happens when violence catches up to you, Green didn't have to imagine any of it. He'd lived it. His wheelchair wasn't a prop from the set department. It was the chair he used every single day. Singleton's decision to cast Green adds a layer of authenticity that no able-bodied actor could provide, no matter how talented. It's a reminder that Boyz in the Hood wasn't just entertainment. It was testimony. The film was showing real consequences of real violence happening to real people in real communities. Green later became a motivational speaker, using his story to educate young people about resilience and overcoming impossible circumstances. His presence in this film represents both the tragedy of gun violence and the human capacity to survive and rebuild. But having real trauma on screen also meant inviting real danger to the set. And that danger came from people who felt the film was telling their story without permission. Fact 4. Real gang members threatened to shoot Ice Cube. Making a film about gang violence in South Central Los Angeles was always going to be complicated, but John Singleton made a choice that most Hollywood directors would never make. He filmed in the actual streets where these stories happened, not on a comfortable studio backlot, not in a safer neighborhood that could double for South Central, the real streets, the actual territory. That decision brought unprecedented authenticity to the film. It also brought real danger. During production, members of the Bloods gang began threatening Ice Cube. They weren't happy about how their gang was being portrayed in the film, and they made it clear they wouldn't be responsible if someone decided to shoot the rapper-turned-actor for disrespecting them. The problem stemmed from one specific scene. Doughboy, played by Ice Cube, kills a member of the Bloods during a drive-by shooting. The local Bloods watched this being filmed in their actual neighborhood and saw it as taking sides in a very real, very deadly conflict. They felt the film was making the Crips look like winners and the Bloods look like victims. And in their world, that kind of disrespect has consequences. This wasn't some actor having a bad day or complaining about catering. This was a legitimate threat of gun violence against a cast member. Gang members had conversations with crew members explaining that the film was portraying their organization negatively in their own territory, and they weren't going to just accept that. One gang member told the production that while he personally wasn't planning to hurt Ice Cube,
I'm not even an actor, and you coming to me talking about I'm perfect for it. We all crazy in here,
Right.
you know, so.
he couldn't guarantee that other members wouldn't take action if they felt disrespected by the final film. Think about what that means. The crew was filming scenes about gang violence while receiving credible threats of actual gang violence.
I swear, if that roll up on the set one more time, I'm gonna blast this.
The fact that Ice Cube was formerly in NWA, famous for songs about gang life and street conflict, made everything more complicated. He was from Compton, he understood the culture, but that didn't protect him. If anything, it made the stakes higher. He should have known better, some felt. He should have shown more respect. The threats were serious enough that production had to change at least one filming location to avoid potential violence. They had to adjust their shooting schedule. They had to take precautions that most Hollywood films never consider. This is the part where most productions would pack up and leave. Film on a soundstage. Use clever camera angles and lighting to fake the location. Prioritize safety over authenticity. But Singleton refused. He knew that moving the production would compromise the film's power. The streets themselves were characters in the story. The actual environment mattered. So instead of leaving, they brought in protection. Fact 5. They filmed with a bulletproof van as cover. After the gang threats and several physical altercations on set, the production made an unusual request. They wanted a van parked directly behind the camera crew while filming. Not for equipment, not for shade, as bulletproof cover in case someone started shooting. Let that reality sink in. A major Hollywood production needed to plan for active gunfire while making a film about gun violence. John Singleton confirmed this in his DVD commentary, explaining that after a particularly dangerous confrontation with local gang members, the crew took this extraordinary safety measure. The van was positioned strategically so that if shooting started, the cast and crew could dive behind it for protection. Cuba Gooding Jr. later revealed that there were fights on set every single day during production. Every day. This wasn't an occasionally tense environment, it was consistently dangerous. The shield van went from being an abundance of caution to being necessary equipment. Think about the surreal nature of this situation. During the day, they'd film scenes of actors pretending to shoot each other. Then between takes, they'd worry about real people actually shooting them. The violence they were depicting and the violence surrounding them became dangerously intertwined. Most directors would have said, "This is insane, we're leaving." But Singleton understood something crucial. This daily danger, this constant threat, this atmosphere of violence. This was exactly what the film was about. How could he authentically portray life in South Central? if his crew wasn't willing to experience even a fraction of what residents experienced every single day. The people living in these neighborhoods didn't get to retreat to a safe soundstage at the end of the day. They lived with this threat constantly. By filming in the actual environment, Singleton forced his crew to understand that reality viscerally. But this commitment to authenticity created a massive technical problem that would cost the production significantly. Fact 6. Helicopters and gunshots ruined the sound. Here's a production nightmare that most viewers never consider. When you film in an active neighborhood dealing with constant police surveillance and regular gun violence, you can't get clean audio. The sound crew faced an impossible situation. In the background of nearly every take, they'd hear police helicopters circling overhead. South Central in the early 1990s was under constant aerial surveillance. Those helicopters became such a regular part of life that residents barely noticed them. But for a film production, trying to record dialogue, they were a disaster. And then there were the gunshots. Not sound effects from the film. Real gunshots from actual street violence happening around them while they filmed. What should have been simple dialogue scenes became a sound engineer's nightmare. The result? Most of the film's dialogue had to be completely re-recorded in post-production through a process called ADR, Automated Dialogue Replacement. The actors had to come back after filming wrapped, watch their scenes, and re-record their lines in a quiet studio, trying to match their lip movements and recreate the emotion they'd felt on set. This is expensive. It's time-consuming. It's creatively frustrating because you're trying to recapture a moment that's already passed, and it's usually something productions try to avoid. But in this case, it was unavoidable. The authentic environment that made the film powerful also made it technically challenging. The helicopters and gunshots that destroyed their audio were the same ones that gave the film its urgent, documentary-like atmosphere. So they paid for expensive ADR sessions and dealt with the technical complications. Because the alternative, filming somewhere safer and quieter, would have compromised the film's soul. This dedication to authenticity came at a cost, but it resulted in a film that felt unlike anything Hollywood had produced before. And that authenticity started years before filming even began. Fact 7. It started as a film school application. Before Boyz in the Hood became a groundbreaking film, before it earned Oscar nominations, before it launched careers and changed cinema, it was just 3 paragraphs in a college application. When John Singleton applied to the USC School of Cinematic Arts, one of the application requirements asked prospective students to describe 3 film ideas they might want to make. Singleton submitted a concept originally titled Summer of '84. This wasn't a screenplay yet. It wasn't even a detailed treatment. It was just an idea, a coming-of-age story set in South Central Los Angeles, following young black men navigating friendship, violence, and survival. That idea got him accepted into film school, and once there, Singleton developed it further, expanding the concept, deepening the characters, sharpening the social commentary. By the time he graduated, he had a screenplay he believed in completely. He was 22 years old. Now imagine being 22 and walking into Hollywood with a script about gang violence, single mothers, police brutality, and systemic racism in black communities. And imagine demanding that you, a 22-year-old first-time filmmaker, be allowed to direct it yourself with complete creative control. Studios laughed at him. They wanted the script, but they wanted established directors. They didn't believe a kid fresh out of film school could handle a production of this scale. They didn't trust his vision. They wanted to buy his story and let someone else tell it. Singleton refused every offer that didn't give him directorial control. He knew Hollywood's history of buying black stories and whitewashing them, softening them, and making them palatable for mainstream audiences. He wasn't letting that happen to his film. Eventually, Columbia Pictures took a chance on him. They gave him a tiny budget by Hollywood standards and let him direct. And Singleton proved every doubter wrong. When the film premiered, it was a critical and commercial success. Singleton became the youngest person ever nominated for Best Director at the Academy Awards, and the first black filmmaker to receive that nomination.
First African American to be nominated for an Academy Award for Best Director.
He was 24 years old at the ceremony. That journey from college application to Oscar nomination took less than 5 years. 5 years from just an idea to changing cinema history. But Singleton didn't create this film in a vacuum. He learned from the filmmakers who came before him, particularly one influential coming-of-age film. Fact 8. The ending was inspired by Stand By Me. John Singleton studied films obsessively, analyzing what worked and why. And one technique he borrowed came from Rob Reiner's 1986 film Stand By Me. In Stand By Me, the adult narrator reflects on his childhood friends, while the young version of his character slowly fades from the screen. It's a powerful visual technique that creates an overwhelming sense of time passing and childhood ending forever. The image of the boy literally disappearing while the man reflects on who that boy was. It hits audiences emotionally in a way that dialogue alone couldn't achieve.
We headed home, and although many thoughts raced through our minds, we barely spoke.
Singleton recognized the power of this technique and adapted it for Boyz n the Hood's devastating final moments. At the end of the film, after Ricky's murder, after the revenge killing, we see Doughboy sitting alone in the alley. He talks to Trey about life, death, and whether anyone will care when he's gone. Then, Ice Cube's character slowly fades from the frame as text appears on screen, revealing that Doughboy was murdered 2 weeks later. The visual disappearance combined with that information creates a gut punch. We just watched this character survive the entire film, only to learn he didn't make it much longer. The slow fade makes his death feel inevitable, predetermined, already in motion even as we watch him. It's the same technique Stand By Me used, but applied to a completely different context with completely different stakes. Stand By Me was nostalgic and bittersweet. Boyz n the Hood is tragic and enraging. Same tool, completely different emotional impact. This shows Singleton's skill as a filmmaker. He didn't just copy the technique, he understood why it worked and adapted it to serve his own story's needs. That's not plagiarism, that's artistry. And speaking of artistic choices, Singleton made another one that most viewers completely miss during their first viewing. Fact 9. Singleton appears as the mailman. Directors putting themselves in their own films is a long Hollywood tradition. Alfred Hitchcock made it an art form. But most director cameos are obvious. A quick walk past the camera, a moment designed to be spotted by eagle-eyed viewers. John Singleton's cameo in Boyz n the Hood is different. It's so natural that most people never notice it, even after multiple viewings. He appears as a postal worker delivering mail to the Baker family home. He's wearing a full mailman uniform, the official cap, sunglasses, everything. The scene happens during a heated confrontation between Doughboy and Ricky, one of the film's more dramatic family moments. While Ice Cube and Morris Chestnut are being emotional and intense,
Mama's boy.
Singleton walks calmly through the scene in his postal uniform, hands the mail directly to their mother, Mrs. Baker, and disappears. It's completely ordinary. It's exactly what would happen in real life. Someone's emotional argument gets interrupted by mundane daily life. The mail still comes. The world keeps turning. This is smart filmmaking. Having mail delivered during a family fight doesn't feel forced or showy. It feels real. It's the kind of everyday interruption that actually happens. Singleton's cameo serves the scene rather than drawing attention to itself. There's also symbolic meaning to the choice. Mail delivery represents connection to the outside world, to opportunities beyond the neighborhood. Singleton himself is literally bringing that possibility into the frame, even as the family conflict suggests they might never escape their circumstances. It's subtle, it's smart, and it perfectly represents Singleton's approach to the entire film, grounded in reality, serving the story, never calling attention to itself unnecessarily. But for all the artistic and symbolic choices Singleton made, the film also sparked important questions about filmmaking ethics that are still relevant today. Fact 10. The ethical question of dangerous filming. Here's a question worth considering. Should filmmakers risk their cast and crew's safety for authenticity? When the Bloods threatened Ice Cube,
pulled the producer aside with a warning about Ice Cube that changed everything.
When fights broke out daily on set, when the crew needed a bulletproof van for protection, at what point does commitment to realism become reckless endangerment? John Singleton made a choice that every person on his crew had to live with. We're filming in the actual streets, with real gang members watching, in a neighborhood where violence happens daily, because that's the only way to tell this story authentically. Was he right? On one hand, nobody was forced to work on the film. They believed in the project enough to accept the risks. The final result is a film that changed cinema and told a story that needed telling. On the other hand, asking young professionals to put themselves in danger for a movie raises serious ethical concerns. What if someone had been seriously hurt? What if the Bloods had followed through on their threats? Cuba Gooding Jr. and Ice Cube have spoken about the production with pride and acknowledgement of how dangerous it was. They're glad they made the film, but they also admit it was scary, volatile, and potentially deadly. What do you think? Should filmmakers prioritize crew safety above all else, even if it means compromising the film's power? Or are some stories important enough that risk becomes acceptable? There's no right answer, but it's a question worth asking. Fact 11. Ice Cube wasn't even an actor yet. When Ice Cube was cast as Doughboy, he had zero professional acting experience. He was a rapper with NWA, famous for confrontational lyrics about police brutality and street life. That's it.
Here's a little something about a nigga like me. Never should have been let out the penitentiary.
John Singleton cast him anyway, believing that Ice Cube embodied Doughboy so completely that acting experience didn't matter. He was right, but that gamble could have destroyed the film if it had gone wrong. This was Singleton's first film, his one shot to prove himself. If Ice Cube's performance didn't work, the film's credibility would collapse. Singleton's career might end before it really began. But Ice Cube delivered one of the most memorable performances in 90s cinema. His Doughboy became iconic, the angry young man dismissed by his own mother, written off by society, but still human, still vulnerable, still capable of love and loyalty. How did a first-time actor achieve that? Singleton recognized that Ice Cube had lived aspects of Doughboy's life. He understood that world, that anger, that sense of being written off. He didn't have to pretend, he had to channel. The success of this gamble opened doors for Ice Cube's entire acting career. He went on to star in Friday, Three Kings, and numerous other films. But it all started with Singleton believing in him when nobody else would. Fact 12. Singleton was younger than some of his actors. Here's the final mind-blowing fact. John Singleton was 23 years old when he directed Boyz in the Hood. Several of his actors were older than he was. Lawrence Fishburne was 29. Tyra Farrell was 28. Even Ice Cube was nearly the same age as his director. Imagine being 23 and directing actors in their late 20s. Imagine telling them how to play characters and shape performances while barely out of film school. Most Hollywood directors don't get their first feature until their 30s or 40s. Singleton jumped straight into the deep end and didn't just survive, he thrived. What gave him the confidence? He knew Hollywood's history of taking black stories away from black storytellers.
I studied the books on Black Hollywood and stuff of what had come before.
If he didn't direct this film himself, someone else would, and they'd probably get it wrong. He'd studied film obsessively, learned from masters, and developed his vision thoroughly before stepping on set. And he believed in his story. He believed his perspective. As someone who actually grew up in South Central, gave him insights that older, more experienced directors couldn't match. He was absolutely right. 12 facts that completely change how you see this masterpiece. A father-son relationship, played by actors 7 years apart. A mother, barely older than her sons. A paralyzed actor whose wheelchair told his real story. Gang members threatening the cast. Bulletproof vans protecting the crew. Helicopters and gunshots destroying the audio. A film school application that became cinema history. A borrowed technique from Stand By Me. A subtle director cameo. Ethical questions about dangerous filming. A rapper's first acting role. And a 23-year-old director leading actors older than himself. Each fact reveals something about what it took to make Boyz n the Hood, the compromises Singleton refused to make, the risks he demanded, the authenticity he prioritized above all else. This wasn't just a movie. It was testimony. It was a young filmmaker refusing to let Hollywood soften or sanitize the reality he'd lived. And 3 decades later, the film still hits just as hard. Now that you know these secrets, will you watch Boyz n the Hood differently? Will you see the age gaps? Will you notice Singleton delivering the mail? Will you think about the bulletproof van just off camera? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Which fact surprised you most? If this video changed how you see Boyz n the Hood, share it. Let's keep this conversation going. Great films deserve more than passive watching. They deserve understanding, context, and appreciation for everything that went into creating them. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more deep dives into cinema history. And remember, every film you love has secrets worth discovering.